Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabadis of Delmer, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service and jbiztechvalley.com.
Well, Rabbi, today as our guest we have one of the non-attorneys in the State Assembly. We were talking about how most of the State Assembly 20 years ago used to be just attorneys. But John McDonald here is a pharmacist, and he deals with legal drugs.
That's important, please.
And I want to welcome you to the show again.
It's a pleasure.
So thanks for coming in.
You know, working on Mark's notes, though, I mean, how much do you feel that being a pharmacist compared to an attorney, or maybe your background maybe hinders you? You don't know all the laws. Does that hinder you a little bit? You feel that you're not that lawyer or legal beagle, to read all the laws, or maybe you give a new perspective in, as our, the representative doesn't say ever in the Constitution you have to be a lawyer, just as a person from the people.
I know. Well, a couple of different thoughts. First of all, to go back to our discussion earlier, what the average person may not realize now is that there's a lower percentage of attorneys in the legislature now than there was 15, 20 years ago, as we discussed.
Well, why do you think that is?
I don't know why that is, because it's interesting, because the legal community still, there's a dearth of jobs out there and well-paying jobs. But
don't you think it's because of the financial disclosure laws?
I'm sure that has something to do with that. Going back to being a pharmacist, the unique thing, I guess, the unique aspect, I'm not only the only pharmacist in the legislature, I'm the only practicing healthcare professional in the legislature. Now, there are two other members that don't practice. They're not pharmacists. One's a nurse and one's an OT. But the reality is, I'm one of the few that's actually still practicing on a regular basis every day. Every day I fill prescriptions one way or the other.
So you're with the people.
That's also, and that's good, but there's also, it's helpful in the healthcare arena to actually have a practitioner involved in saying, that's right, we'll validate that, but, we're going to invalidate that comment because that's not really the way it actually plays out.
I mean, look, when Medicare, when all these health issues come up to the Assembly,
bingo,
you're the authority.
Well, I wouldn't say the authority, but put it this way, I've got a few nuggets of information that I can share.
I used to work for a healthcare practitioner. Joel Miller was a dentist.
Yes, right.
And I had to juggle his dental office schedule, his DO's district office schedule, his home's personal schedule, and his Albany office schedule.
Yeah.
Man, that's tough.
It's
not easy.
Well, that's all. And but the thing is, I mostly manage.
And isn't Steve Katz a practicing healthcare? Because he's a vet, and he has.
I don't think he's still. I don't know if he still practices or not.
He just opened up $1 million office in the Bronx.
Well, then I guess he is practicing.
And he has an email, dogs and cats.
Human healthcare professional.
Human healthcare professional. Okay.
We'll go with that. But I think the reality is that the diversity of the Assembly and the Senate is critical to really mirroring the diversity of New York State. And the fact that not everybody is an attorney, that's not a bad thing, because we want to make sure that educators, we want to make sure that librarians, engineers, all are part of that discussion when it comes to lawmaking in New York State.
Right. Working on what Mark's saying, though, we always have discussions about the pay scale, but I'm not dealing with the pay now. That's not my question. But it's like a part-time. That's the issue.
Yeah.
So obviously it is part-time for you because you have time for work. Other Assemblymen come in, I'm running from one district to another. I don't have a minute to breathe.
Yeah.
And how do you maybe balance?
But on that note, I got to tell you, there are more legislators who do not have a part-time job on the side,
right?
And they're just living on their part-time legislative salary.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to ask. Is it a part-time or a full-time job? Obviously, you have time for work.
I have 15, 16-hour days, so yes, and yes, and yes. At the end of the day, I don't stay chained to the pharmacy counter for 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day filling prescriptions. Do I do all the troubleshooting, deal with the insurance companies, deal with the business matters? Yeah, absolutely. And those you can be done off hours. It doesn't need to be during the course of the day, but the public will see me, and that's a good thing. Because sometimes elected officials kind of get like they're in this lofty perch. And quite frankly, that lofty perch is not the best spot to hear what the public has to say. It is also, I think, in regards to, is it a part-time job or a full-time job? I believe it's a full-time job. That being said, I think it would be disgraceful if we prohibited legislators from allowing to work in their entitled field, the field that they've worked for and educated for. Because once again, it gets back to is what were the makers of our Constitution focused on? Were they focused on creating lifelong politicians, or were they focused on making sure that representatives of the community at large were representing the interests of the people in the legislature? And that's the way I feel. But of course I'm going to say that because I'm not going to give up my pharmacy gig, nor should I have to.
Well, I think it's important also, sometimes you hear criticism maybe on a national level. I mean, Mark's our New York State Authority of Representative on the news beat, but they say some people, they may be intelligent, they came out of college, Ivy League, and went right into maybe some political job, and they got voted in, and they never had a real job, or, again, not like what you're saying, deal with real people, know what their issues is. They can't pay for a pharmacy, so you see a person, I can't pay for it, so the troubles a real person has to deal with.
Well, the other thing is that there is this risk if we make it a full-time job and that's all people can do, that they become entirely dependent on the system to keep them gainfully employed. At the end of the day, when I was mayor for 13 years in the city of Cohoes, and now I make my decision on what's best for the people that I represent. I don't need to worry about making that decision on a special interest to make sure that they keep contributing to my campaigns so I can continue to run.
So that's the reason. Okay, I was wondering why, what the anti-full-time legislator.
Well, if bottom line is that the reality is that we each represent 125,000 people. Right. But honestly, when you look at fundraising, and you've been covering this much longer than I, you see the same usual suspects. That's right. And they have every right to contribute to candidates as much as they possible. Does it make a decision in some people's minds? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But if it became full-time, wouldn't people be more interested to know what the contributions are, and does that sway and does that have an impact? And possible.
Yeah.
I know at the end of the day, I always said as mayor, hey, I can go back to my day job. It's not a bad gig.
It's a good way to put it. I mean, it's good in a Torah sense also. We don't want to use the word bribe, but, like this, you don't have any, listen, I don't need this job. I'm only there in dinner. And,
right.
Once you say Cohoes, just even for myself, and I know I'm a rabbi, but I feel like I'm the average citizen, pretty much uninformed. I'm just saying, what is your district? I mean, you say you're from Cohoes, but what
question.
Cities does it take in?
One town in Saratoga, Rensselaer County, and then
3 counties, Saratoga, Rensselaer, and Albany, but Waterford, right down the river to Albany, and a good third of the city of Albany, which is unlike.
Really? Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I travel all the way up Central Avenue, up to Everett Road.
Well, you represent the South End.
West Hill,
right.
Arbor Hill, right. South End of Albany, North of Albany.
Well, you know why I'm mentioning the South End is because you had a health clinic there.
That's right.
And I was so honored that I've been stuck by a lot of assemblymen.
Just so you know, he's bringing this up. This is not a HIPAA violation on my part.
But you gave me a flu shot, and you were there for a free clinic.
Yeah.
And I was honored. I never was so honored to have an assemblyman give me a flu shot. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
and,
we also gave the mayor one too, as you know. That was public on news, and I like to say that we gave the mayor of the city of Albany a shot in the arm.
He gave me a shot in the arm also.
But not shot somewhere else.
But I just, and I was glad to see that you were the one that they chose the video clip from on Channel 9 than me. Because I didn't, like you said, I was better on the other side of the camera.
You were there just for preventative health.
That's right.
Doesn't that make challenges? I mean, you could be a representative, but in Arbor Hill, obviously, it's a low economic end, and then I don't know, Saratoga must have some people on the higher end. It's a nice area.
I represent the town of Waterford, the town and village of Waterford, which is a nice community. But when you really look at the core of the 108th Assembly District between Albany, Troy, Rensselaer, Cohoes, Waterville, Green Island, very urban areas, very areas that have some great people, but do have some very low, moderate income individuals who need support, need services, and we need to help them. And then we have the outliers of North Greenbush and Waterford, which are actually good middle class communities. However, North Greenbush, of course, does have some rural components to it, which people tend to forget.
But I wanted to.
People have different needs. That's what I'm saying.
I think, isn't it Waterville who the school superintendent in Waterville is upset about the state aid that she's getting?
Watervliet's had some challenges with
Yeah.
state aid. They have challenges overall with their overall fiscal climate because of some activities before this superintendent came on board. But obviously, with the life under the tax cap and tax freeze has limited the ability for communities to raise additional revenues. So she's been looking obviously for more aid, which is not unlike most urban school districts and upstate school districts. There is a huge disparity between aid for these urban areas where we're being funded at 65, 66% of where we should be at versus some other parts of the state, particularly in the Long Island area.
What can you do to help Watervliet in the next session?
Well, to help Watervliet and the others, there's a
Well,
couple different components, but no, they're both. I mean, they're all, Watervliet's, Lori, the superintendent's doing a good job of trying to restore their finances. Obviously, to help bring them additional aid is critical. To help eliminate the gap elimination adjustment, which has now been in place for 3 to 4 years now, that would have a meaningful difference. And like anything else, you have to look at the overall state in regards to what the argument is. And quite frankly, right now, everyone is still continuing to mention that gap elimination aid has to be eliminated. So let's work on that, because it's much easier to work collectively with everybody on certain things, particularly when a community like Watervliet may not have its own individuality to say this is an outlier. Quite frankly, there are many cities like Watervliet throughout the state of New York, and it makes it difficult to make that argument. I always look at what's the uniqueness that we can look at. For the city of Albany last year, remember Faye and I worked on the fact of the individuality of the city of Albany School District. And what is that individuality? They have some of the highest percentage of students in charter schools in New York State. We use that to be able to bring an additional $1.25 million of aid to the school district here in the city of Albany, which has had a tremendous positive impact on their overall finances and, of course, reflects better with the taxpayers. You look at that individuality. I'm not saying I'm for or against charter schools. The point is charter schools have always been funded at the percent of the host school district. By able to take that uniqueness and say, well, wait a minute, that's fine. But at the same token, you have a district where over 50%, 65% of its aid against from the state is going directly to charter schools for only 20% of the students. What about the other 80%? And what about the taxpayers?
So what's the uniqueness of Watervliet?
That's the challenging with Watervliet.
Besides the arsenal.
The arsenal is not a unique item in that aspect. I mean, we don't have too many arsenals in the capital region. But people say, well, obviously it must have a lot of tax-exempt property. Well, they do.
Yeah.
But guess what? In the capital region, the city with the highest amount of tax-exempt? No.
No?
Rensselaer.
Why? Churches?
No. Rensselaer, I think there's a combination. I think obviously the Port of Rensselaer and Port of Albany takes up a large amount of land. They have a lot of properties off the tax rolls because of IDA projects and things like that. But Rensselaer, it goes in order, Rensselaer, Troy, Albany, and Watervliet.
Really? Because Albany has 80% tax exempt.
No, it's not 80%.
Between the universities, between the churches?
It's about 60%. It's high. It's significantly high. And when I say those four cities, Rensselaer, Troy, Albany, they're in the top 10. The top four out of maybe the top 5 or 6 in the state of New York. So it is significant. Many nonprofits. We are very blessed to have many nonprofits here in the capital region, whether they are faith-based organizations, whether they're providing for the developmentally disabled, whatever it may be. A lot of properties off the tax rolls. I'm not arguing about that, but it is a fact of life. We have a lot of IDA projects that are done in the name of economic development. Well, an IDA project is off the tax roll as well. So you have to keep that in mind too. So, look at Albany Med. If they've done an addition, that's not on a tax roll because it's a nonprofit, but also probably because it was done under the auspices of the
But they made an agreement with Albany, the city made an agreement with Albany Med to pay taxes, or to pay something in lieu of pilot.
A service, a silo as they call it, a SILET, S-I-A, service in lieu of taxes.
Okay. So I knew there was some money.
There's
coming
something.
back.
I don't know what it is at this stage. Again, I don't think that's been fully disclosed.
It hasn't. It's not a hard number yet, but it's the concept.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what?
So Watervliet, getting back to their situation, have we been able to identify some buckets of money to assist them? Absolutely. Have we been able to bring additional revenue outside of the budget process in the last year or so? Sure. Excuse me, it is inclusive of the budget process, but still, we have a long way to go. And at the same token, the district is doing what they're supposed to do, controlling their expenses, estimating properly the revenue so they don't get into a situation like they've gotten to before. And a lot of hand-holding and a lot of working together, which is good.
Let me ask you about your priorities for the upcoming session.
Yeah.
What would you be focusing in on, and what, if you were able to get a committee chairmanship or be able to be, shift your committee assignments from last term, what would you want?
Yeah. Committee chairmanships, as you know, Mark, for a second year or second term member are not likely, more than very unlikely. I've been told maybe by your third or fourth term, you might be able to get a subcommittee chairmanship. So we'll put that off to the side. In regards to committee assignments, I currently actually serve on 6 committees. Normally get 4. I requested more because I like to be busy, and I figure the more you hang out, the more you get exposed to items, the more you learn. So I have put a request to make some changes. I love the core basics: local government, cities, mental health and developmentally disabled, aging. Those are ones that I've been on, I want to stay on. Real property I've been on, and heritage tourism I've been on. They're good ones. But I also would like to add into the mix, and hopefully keep a caseload of 6 committees, is higher education and the insurance committee as well. Health I would like to at some point, but not at this point in my life. I mean, the reality is unofficially people talk to me quite regularly about health committee issues. And I also want to be careful to make sure that I'm not in a position of conflict of interest, which can happen. Higher education makes perfect sense. People forget that higher education is about universities and colleges, but don't forget it's also about the professions. It's about the professions, and I'm in one of those professions.
Right.
So it makes perfect sense. Priority-wise, it's interesting because, as you know, next Wednesday the governor will be laying out his priorities, and of course it starts the
session
starts
officially.
We're underway.
Right.
And
January 7th.
It's interesting because obviously part of our agenda will have to be respond to the governor's interests and messages.
Yeah.
Obviously, going back to education, trying to, now that the state is in a much better financial situation, trying to lessen the burden of the gap elimination adjustments so we can see some real property tax relief to residents and some restoration of good cultural programs in the education center, to me, is something that's important. I am still very closely involved in monitoring the whole heroin and opiate crisis, which has been a very big item, not only in the capital.
Do you see it from a pharmacist?
I see it from both ends, both the legal, as Mark said, and the legal and the illegal drugs component. And we spent a lot over the course of the summer when we're out of session. I did a lot of forums throughout the region, talking and educating about what's been done, but what still remains to be done.
We talked to, again, Mark and I have many political officials, including the sheriffs, and they're just saying that it's just an epidemic. I mean, that's from a police standpoint.
No, it is.
I want to hear from, more like what I was saying at the beginning. You're in the medical field, what's happening.
It is an epidemic, and it gets back to the same guiding principle that we've always talked about, is that medications, when prescribed for the appropriate person by the appropriate professional, serve an appropriate place in people's lives. However, when we start sharing medications, start sharing drugs, and then, by the way, we start relying on the guy in the street who has no pharmacy background to supply us with drugs, we have problems. We have problems with dosing. We have problems with consistency. And what people don't realize is that even with prescription drugs, it's very easy to develop an addiction after 2 to 3 or 4 days of therapy. So
really that short?
It's not that hard. Think of the typical high school student, bangs up his knee during a basketball game, goes to the orthopedic surgeon, gives him a bottle of hydrocodone. After 3 days, hey, this feels pretty good. I think this is going to be part of my daily routine.
And people get
and they're on the road. Really? And once they're gone, they start ravaging grandma's house. They start taking it from their sister, and then they move to heroin, which is much cheaper and a lot easier to get.
I didn't know, is it just even a few days a person can get hooked on these?
If taken in excessive amounts, it can be.
Since we're on this topic, are you in favor of medical marijuana?
I'm sorry.
Are you in favor of medical marijuana and the way it's been set up?
I was co-sponsor of the bill. I mean, I think as the chief sponsors will tell you in the Senate Assembly, probably a little more restrictive than what they would have liked. But on the other hand, I think the governor's taken the proper tact. We need to be careful with this, getting it done and getting it done properly and getting it started properly.
Okay. You mentioned higher education was a committee you wanted to be added to. Do you, and the higher education committee gets involved with the Board of Regents selections. So it's education and higher education committees
they
get
both
involved
do,
in that.
Yeah, in the legislature, as you know.
Right. So I was just wondering if you, there are, I think, 3 seats up this year.
There are many seats up, I guess. I think there's going to be a potential of up to 7 seats that will be available. So that'll make for a great debate. I mean, obviously, it goes without saying in the education arena that Common Core and teachers' assessment has monopolized a huge amount of time and energy and caused a great amount of anguish to many people. And really, at the end of the day, we still don't know where we're at. I mean, as you know, the governor just vetoed his own teacher, the own bill that was negotiated in the budget process.
Well, because he said by the time he proposed it and the time that it came back to his desk, it was moot, because there was so many other changes in the Common Core and higher and education. So
it's a challenge, and we all know the state ed probably could have done a better job in regards to the implementation of the Common Core. Disclosure: my wife is a teacher, so I this is pillow talk. I hear about it when I come home at night, and I also know what it's like to be in a classroom. As much as I was mayor of a city and didn't run the classrooms or run the school district per se, I spent a huge amount of time in the schools because I think it's important that the mayor be engaged in the community. And it is challenging in the classroom, but this gets the whole education component, which could be its own 3-hour show, is a very long road that needs to be traveled. And there needs to be discussion, sure, about performances of not only teachers, but also supervisors and administrators. But we also have to start really having that dialogue nobody wants to talk about home life and family life and parental responsibility. And I'm not saying to blame it on the parents, but I can tell you that poverty, homelessness, they play large factors, particularly in our urban settings. And at the same token, it's never really clearly demonstrated to be that you're a teacher and you're the problem. I haven't seen that yet.
Well, I've always said it's PPP, parents, professionals, and peers. And, any of those 3 legs, the weakest of those 3 legs is what will be the downfall of the child, because if he hangs out with the wrong crowd, the peers, that'll be death knell. If the professionals are not on top of it and they're just coasting because they have tenure and they're not, that's going to be a death knell. And if the parents are not around and not giving their kids help, that's going to be a problem. So you need to have all 3 strong legs in order to make it, for a child to make it. It's very tricky because it doesn't always happen.
It sure is. And it's going to be an interesting dialogue. The governor's kind of, I think, made that priority #1, breaking up the monopoly, as it was said. I'll be curious to hear more from him about exactly how it's proven to be that problem and what we can do to improve the process. But it goes back to your comment about, the legislature basically appoints the Board of Regents, and it's the New York State Assembly. That being said, is there going to be an effort to change what the Constitution's laid out for the last couple hundred years? We'll see. We'll see what the governor has proposed.
What other issues do you think will be up front and looking into your crystal ball coming into the...
I'm interested, in some of the governor's writings, in preparation for this coming session. He talks about this $500 million shared services. Shared services fund, and being a local government person,
what would that be? I mean,
well, that's what we're trying to figure out. No. Hey, I'm supposed to ask you that question. That's part of the challenge. This concept of that we can just merge local governments like this tomorrow are not that simple.
Safe.
Then it's not safe and it's not a good idea. But can we do something to reduce the regulations and the rules, but also to provide the financial incentive to see how can we provide services in a different format, in a more cost-effective format. And I spoke to the fact that before I left my last 1.5 years in office, worked very closely with Sheriff Apple, Mayor Manning of Waterville, and Mayor McDonald of Green Island, and we merged our communications department into Albany County, saving the taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars per year to start, and by the way, offloading a lot of long-term legacy costs. Is there a way we can do services like that or other services with maybe not every single local government, but the ones that it makes perfect sense?
It's just the trouble is people have to vote for it. You can't impose that on people.
No, they didn't vote on it in Cohoes. We went through a legislative process. The elected officials had to vote on it, but the general public didn't have to vote on it. Voting on a dissolution of a town or a village, yes, the public has to vote for that, and unfortunately the process that currently is in play is flawed because it basically says to the rabbi and the mark, hey guys, we're going to merge. Okay, well, what are we going to do? Well, don't worry, just vote yes and we'll figure it out later. And that is the process right now. And that's not really a good process if you're going to take a really an endowed look at the process. So I am interested to see what this money is going to be used for. I'm interested to see how we can help the local governments fall within the margins that you need to be able to achieve the tax freeze. Because at the end of the day, I want all my taxpayers to be able to see the benefits of the tax freeze. Personally, the tax freeze sounds great, but I don't like the way it's being done. I don't like the idea that we have to spend state resources to send you back a rebate check. I think it'd be much wiser to go to Mayor Sheehan or to Mayor Rosemillion and Troy and say, here, this is the gap that you have to, if you keep your taxes at no increase, we'll give you that dollar amount of what those rebate checks would be versus having to go through the effort to do it. In other words, incent them not to raise taxes in the first instance. And then we've actually accomplished no increase in taxes, which I think will make for a greater mental outlook for the average taxpayer.
So in the last few minutes, you are rising in the seniority ranks.
How many years
next
again do
session.
you have?
Well,
2.
So this is your second term.
I'm in my second term.
So I wanted to know, like, you know, what happens with seniority? How does that, as you rise in seniority, you know, you have 17 new people coming in?
I think there's 16 between both parties, the Republicans and Democrats.
Right. And then, so you have and then there are some who were elected in March who were like half year.
Actually, we didn't have anybody elected.
No, there was like there was a guy from Long Island who switched over. There was some others. They had 3 special elections earlier this year. I got the numbers. I can tell you later who they are. But anyway, so what happens? You know, I know that your license plate gets lowered, but what else happens? You know, license plate number, I should say.
I can't. You know, once again, being only in the second term, so 4 year, years 3 and 4, it doesn't really put us in a position for committee chairmanships. Right.
But what? So you just the license plate, lower number on the license plate. You went from what, 149 to 130?
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is just a trivial thing.
Well, you know what's even worse? There are only 150 members in the assembly, and if you have a license plate 153, you really feel bad, don't you?
Well,
and they do have more than 150 license plate numbers.
They do have a few.
So it's a good thing you were below the 150 mark.
Well, I got the luck of the draw, I guess you would say. You know, I think at the end of the day, you know, the way I look at this is that, first of all, and Speaker Silver had these comments earlier on when we first got there, you know, don't come in here thinking you know everything, because the reality is you don't. But you do know an awful lot, and your constituents elected you to represent them. Do yourself a favor. Listen. Listen to what goes on, and then act. And I think that I can tell you that what I've learned in the last 2 years has been remarkable. Like I said, I was able to put through a couple pieces of legislation focused on particularly the heroin crisis, which personally was important to me because I see the issue both professionally and as a citizen. And at the same token, whether it's behind the closed doors in the conference or whether it's on the floor, I've been able to voice the concerns of my constituents at the appropriate time for the appropriate reason. And that's something that I'll do, and it'll be under those major areas of healthcare. It'll be under those areas of local government. It'll be under the areas of small business. We have too much regulation going on in our society that is crippling our businesses, crippling our local governments, and might allow them to be more efficient. So we got to keep working on that.
Thank you very much, Assemblyman McDonald. You've been informative. You're a good man, and that's why a good representative reelected, and she's going to watch your star grow higher and higher. So continue with your good success and with good health.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Much success.
Thank you very much.